Railroad Mesothelioma Lawsuit. Railroad asbestos exposure injuries. Many railroad workers have developed mesothelioma and other asbestos-related diseases after years of exposure on the job. For decades, railroad workers' asbestos exposure occurred routinely through insulation, brakes, gaskets, and other asbestos-containing products used throughout the railroad industry. Despite widespread knowledge of the dangers, many railroad workers were not warned or provided proper protective equipment. Mesothelioma and railroad workers have become closely linked in occupational health studies and asbestos litigation due to the long latency period of the disease and the volume of exposure during daily tasks. Under the Federal Employers' Liability Act, FELA, injured workers and their families have the right to pursue compensation from negligent railroad employers. This includes filing an FELA wrongful death claim for surviving family members of those who passed away from mesothelioma. Railroad companies had a duty to protect workers from hazardous substances like asbestos, but many failed to do so. As a result, former employees continue to face life-altering diagnoses years after exposure. Railroad mesothelioma lawsuits aim to hold employers accountable and provide financial support for medical bills, lost income, and other damages. If you or a loved one worked in the railroad industry and were exposed to asbestos, you may qualify for compensation through a FELA claim, Railroad Mesothelioma Lawsuit. Contact Gianaris trial lawyers today for a free consultation. In this video, we will discuss railroad worker asbestos exposure, the science behind injury, mesothelioma lawsuits, and much more. How is mesothelioma linked to the railroad industry? For much of the 20th century, railroad workers were regularly exposed to asbestos in locomotives, brake pads, gaskets, insulation, and other parts, often without protection or warning. When these materials aged or were disturbed, microscopic fibers were released into the air. Inhaled fibers can embed in the lung lining, leading decades later to inflammation, scarring, and cancer. Family members were also put at risk through secondhand exposure when fibers were carried home on clothing and equipment. Despite clear evidence of asbestos dangers since the mid-1900s, many railroad employers failed to act. Common routes of asbestos exposure in the railroad industry. Asbestos insulation in boilers, steam lines, and pipes. Used heavily in steam locomotives and repair shops. Brake shoes and pads contained asbestos to resist heat and wear, regularly replaced and ground down by workers. Clutches and gaskets, commonly handled by mechanical and maintenance personnel during locomotive servicing. Engine and train car insulation, lining around electrical panels, floors, and walls frequently contained asbestos. Asbestos cement and fireproof panels, used in roundhouses and other railroad structures for fire resistance. Dust and debris from maintenance shops, asbestos particles from worn components often contaminated work environments. Secondhand exposure through clothing or tools. Family members of railroad employees were sometimes exposed by laundering contaminated workwear or handling dusty gear. Which railroad jobs faced asbestos exposure risks? Many railroad employees faced occupational asbestos exposure during routine maintenance, repair, and daily operations involving engines, train cars, and track infrastructure. Workers who handled asbestos-containing insulation or disturbed older components were often exposed to dangerous airborne fibers without proper safety measures. Railroad workers exposed to asbestos-containing materials commonly work in the following roles. Boilermakers regularly worked with asbestos insulation in steam engines and heating systems. Brake mechanics handled asbestos-containing brake pads and linings during replacements and repairs. Pipe fitters installed and maintained pipes wrapped in asbestos insulation throughout locomotives and facilities. Carmen and car inspectors repaired train cars lined with asbestos paneling and insulation materials. Locomotive engineers spent long hours in engine compartments with asbestos-laden heat shields and gaskets. Roundhouse and shop workers, frequently exposed to airborne asbestos dust from grinding, cutting, or removing contaminated materials. Track workers handled asbestos cement products and debris from aging infrastructure near train lines. Electricians worked around switchboards and panels insulated with asbestos for fireproofing. Conductors and yard workers indirectly exposed through shared workspaces, contaminated surfaces, and second-hand contact with other workers' clothing. Machinists routinely used lathes, grinders, and tools to cut or shape asbestos-containing parts and gaskets, often releasing dangerous fibers into the air. Can I file a wrongful death lawsuit if my loved one passed away from mesothelioma? Yes, you may be eligible to file a wrongful death lawsuit if your loved one passed away from mesothelioma due to occupational asbestos exposure in the railroad industry. These claims can be filed under FELA if the death resulted from unsafe working conditions or negligence by a railroad employer. A FELA, a wrongful death claim, allows surviving family members to obtain compensation for medical expenses, lost income, and emotional suffering. Other asbestos-related diseases. Asbestos exposure can cause more than just mesothelioma. Many individuals develop a range of asbestos-related illnesses over time due to inhaling or ingesting microscopic fibers. These diseases often progress slowly, appearing decades after the initial exposure. The fibers can become lodged in lung tissue and other organs, leading to inflammation, scarring, or cancerous changes. While mesothelioma is the most well-known, several other serious health conditions are recognized as asbestos-related cancer risks. Other asbestos-related illnesses include asbestosis, a chronic lung disease caused by inhaled asbestos fibers, leading to lung tissue scarring and breathing difficulty. Asbestos-related lung cancer, a type of lung cancer directly caused by prolonged exposure to asbestos fibers, especially among smokers. Pleural thickening, a condition where the lining of the lungs becomes thick and stiff, often causing chest pain and shortness of breath. Pleural plaques, areas of fibrous thickening on the lung lining that may indicate past asbestos exposure, though not always symptomatic. Asbestos-related gastrointestinal cancers. Certain studies have linked ingestion of asbestos fibers to increased risks of stomach and colorectal cancers. If you or a loved one suffered other asbestos exposure-related injuries, you may still qualify to take legal action. Contact Gianaris trial lawyers to get a free consultation and discuss your legal options. Do I qualify for a railroad worker mesothelioma lawsuit? Qualifying for a railroad worker asbestos exposure lawsuit depends on your work history, medical diagnosis, and the specific nature of your asbestos exposure. If you worked in the railroad industry and developed mesothelioma or another asbestos-related illness, you may be eligible to pursue compensation through asbestos litigation. Mesothelioma settlements can provide financial relief for medical bills, lost income, and pain and suffering. Railroad workers exposed to asbestos-containing materials decades ago are still receiving settlements due to the long latency period of mesothelioma. A qualified attorney can help review your medical records, identify responsible asbestos companies, and determine the best legal path forward. If a loved one passed away due to asbestos-related disease, surviving family members may also be eligible to file a wrongful death claim. Compensation from these lawsuits can help reduce the burden of out-of-pocket costs related to treatment, funeral expenses, and loss of financial support. Gianaris Trial Lawyers offers experienced legal guidance to help victims and families recover damages through mesothelioma lawsuits and asbestos trust fund claims. Contact us today for a free consultation. Gathering evidence to secure mesothelioma compensation. Evidence is critical in mesothelioma claims as it helps prove the link between a victim's diagnosis and their workplace exposure to asbestos. Law firms experienced in asbestos litigation can assist by identifying liable parties, gathering employment and medical documentation, and tracing exposure sources across decades. They also help preserve time-sensitive records, such as witness testimony and shipping manifests, which may otherwise be lost. By organizing these elements into a clear legal strategy, attorneys increase the chances of securing compensation for victims or their surviving family members. Common evidence for mesothelioma lawsuits may include employment records detailing years of service, job roles, and job sites, medical records confirming a mesothelioma diagnosis and treatment history, Social Security and union records supporting railroad work history, testimony from coworkers or supervisors about asbestos exposure, invoices, shipping logs, or product lists showing asbestos materials used, pathology reports showing the presence of asbestos fibers in tissue samples, exposure timelines linking job duties to specific asbestos-containing products, documentation of out-of-pocket medical costs and financial losses, death certificates and autopsy results in wrongful death cases, historical safety manuals or corporate memos that failed to warn workers, possible compensation for railroad workers in mesothelioma lawsuit. Mesothelioma lawsuits often involve substantial damages due to the aggressive nature of the disease, its long latency period, and the overwhelming financial and emotional toll on victims and their families. Legal claims may seek compensation for both economic losses and the intangible suffering caused by a mesothelioma diagnosis. Whether through settlements, verdicts, or asbestos trust funds, damages help cover critical expenses and provide support during an otherwise devastating time. Common damages in railroad worker asbestos exposure mesothelioma lawsuits may include medical expenses for surgeries, chemotherapy, immunotherapy, and ongoing care, lost wages and diminished earning capacity due to illness, pain and suffering caused by physical symptoms and emotional distress, costs associated with assistive equipment and palliative support, funeral and burial expenses in wrongful death claims, loss of companionship, care, or guidance for surviving spouses and children, punitive damages in cases involving egregious corporate negligence, compensation from asbestos trust funds when manufacturers are bankrupt. Gianaris Trial Lawyers, experienced railroad mesothelioma lawyers. Railroad workers who were exposed to asbestos decades ago are now facing the life-altering consequences of mesothelioma and other asbestos-related diseases. Gianaris Trial Lawyers is committed to representing these workers and their families with compassion, precision, and a deep understanding of railroad asbestos litigation. Our firm is equipped to pursue compensation through lawsuits, asbestos trust fund claims, or FELA wrongful death claims, whatever legal pathway best supports your case. We understand the complex medical evidence, long latency periods, and history of workplace exposure that shape these cases. If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with mesothelioma after working in the railroad industry, we invite you to contact Gianaris Trial Lawyers today. Our experienced railroad mesothelioma lawyers offer free, confidential consultations to help you understand your rights and the next steps in your case. Let us help you seek justice, financial support, and accountability from the companies responsible.